Please share where you're watching from and consider subscribing to the channel. When I was 28, I took a solo weekend in Arapahoe National Forest because I wanted the kind of quiet that has weight to it. My coworkers warned me like they always do, mountain lions, bears, weird men, then ended with the same refrain: a woman shouldn't go alone. I'd done self-defense classes, carried pepper spray, and I wasn't looking for drama. I wanted 2 days with no email, no small talk, just trees in my own head. I picked a spot I found on trip reports near Silver Creek, around 9,200 feet, a little clearing tucked in thick lodgepole pines with 2 big boulders on the east side and a cold stream close enough to hear. I got there just before 5. The air at that elevation feels thin and blue, every breath lifted like smoke. No cell service. My GPS watch had enough signal to drop a waypoint. Old fire rings, 2 log benches, nobody else around. Exactly what I wanted. I set the tent first, 2-person low profile, and did the tidy, routine things that make a camp feel safe. Shoes lined by the door, headlamp in the mesh pocket, pepper spray and flashlight on the sleeping pad where my hand would find them in the dark. Dinner was ramen and a granola bar, eaten cross-legged while the last sun slid off the boulders. I stashed food in a canister about 40 feet away, cinched it off the trunk with a length of cord, double-checked the knots. The creek stitched its one sound through the trees. No birds, no engines, just fire pops and water. By full dark it went very cold fast. The silence shifted from pleasant to heavy, the way a blanket is heavy when it presses on your ribs. I crawled into my bag, zipped the tent, checked the zipper again, lay on my back and watched faint branch shadows move on the nylon. I kept hearing things that were nothing: a needle sliding against a needle, a seed cone dropping, something small in the leaf litter. I told myself I was proud, not for being brave, just for doing the thing I said I would do, and let my breathing count itself. Sometime after 10 I drifted off, expecting light through the trees to be the next thing. Scrape. I woke with a full-body flinch, listening hard. At first I thought, wind. Then I heard it again, right beside my head, low to the ground, deliberate. A slow, dry draw of something sharp along nylon. Scrape, pause. Scrape. The tent wall moved the smallest amount where the sound tracked. I held my breath until it hurt. There was breathing out there, too human close. Not the quick animal snuff of a raccoon. Deep, steady, crude, like whoever it was didn't care if I heard. The point pressed in about a foot above the ground. The sound changed when it found the zipper. Tick, 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 like a blade counting teeth. The hair on my arms rose. I slid my hand under the sleeping bag, found flashlight, found pepper spray. The metal felt like ice. I didn't move the light. I didn't want to give myself a shape. The ticking along the zipper slowed. A hand, flat, fingers flexing, pushed the fabric just enough to show itself as a darker shadow in the larger shadow. I said as evenly as I could, "I'm calling emergency. I have pepper spray." My voice sounded like someone else had borrowed it and dented it. The blade noise stopped. So did the breathing. For 3 seconds there was nothing. Then fast footfalls and dead needles moving away. I kept the spray up and the light down and didn't unzip. The footsteps didn't go far. They went wide. Whoever it was circled the camp, slow, quiet when they wanted to be, louder when they didn't. Sometimes they were close enough that I could see a darker shape between the trunks if I let my eyes unfocus through the mesh. Sometimes I lost them altogether and only heard the creak, which was worse. The canister clinked once like someone tapped it with a ring or a buckle. A little show. I thought about running for the car and pictured the 30 yards of cold trees between here and the trail spur and pictured the slit opening again from the other side as I reached for the zipper. I remembered the satellite communicator in the tent pocket. Stupid, I'd almost left it at home, fumbled it out with shaking hands, and hit SOS. The unit gave a small confirming buzz and showed its tiny green blink. Coordinates gone to a system I couldn't see. That helped. Not much, but enough to make my chest feel less like a box. The circling went on a long time. Sometimes it was only leaf crush. Sometimes a twig snap and the fast quiet that follows when someone tests whether you heard them. I didn't turn on the flashlight. I didn't unzip. I stayed like that with the spray in my fist until my hand went numb. At some point the footsteps faded toward the rocks and didn't come back. The cold found my face first, then the places where the sleeping bag had thin spots, and then the place behind my knees. I watched the tent ceiling for a long time. When the helicopter thumped into the valley, I cried before I knew I was crying. The light swept the timber, found my little triangle of nylon held steady. A loudspeaker called my name and told me to stay put. I unzipped with hands that didn't feel like hands and sat up into a cone of white. The ranger came from the east slope with his beam down and his shoulders up, quick the way people move when their job teaches them how fast things turn. He checked the clearing first, behind the logs, around the canister tree, the edges where the duff went darker, before he spoke. I pointed at the cut. He knelt, thumbed the little lip where the blade had started, and ran the light along the faint score marks over the zipper. There were boot prints in the soft places. Not many. Smart feet. Remote sites pull all kinds, he said. You did the exact right thing. If you'd waited or tried to talk to them, he let that hang. We listened to the rotor slap. Another ranger checked the nearest game trail and the spur toward the road. No eyeshine. No second camp. When they walked me down to the truck, I kept looking over my shoulder, like you do after a nightmare, even though the nightmare is the thing you just walked through. The beam from the helicopter moved with us, painting trees in slices. At the station, I signed a report with hands that were steadier than I expected. I slept an hour on a plastic chair under a corkboard of trail maps and lightning strike warnings. The cut tent lay folded beside my pack like a shed skin. By early summer, I'd convinced myself I needed to prove something, not to anyone else, just to the part of me that watched survival documentaries at 2 a.m. and thought I could do that. Glacier National Park felt like the right test. I read the ranger notes about backcountry permits, saw all the warnings about traveling solo, bears, and zero cell service, and still thought the rules were written for other people. I wasn't reckless. I packed light but logical. Tent, bag, stove, filter, knife, a week of dehydrated meals, map, compass, GPS. I told myself the leaner the kit, the clearer the mind. At the permit desk, the ranger asked twice if I'd ever gone alone this far out. I said I wanted to unplug. He sighed, circled 2 zones on a map, and went through the speech about staying on marked trails, keeping food hung high, and remembering that helping Glacier often means hours, not minutes. I nodded like a good student. The day was bright and thin with wind on the ridges. I set off from Logan Pass under a sky so clean it felt clinically sterilized. Day 1 was a long, reasonable push. 10 miles by lunch, trail as well defined as a sidewalk, other hikers at friendly intervals. My shoulders settled around the pack. I found water, filtered, ate, moved, ate again the way the day tells you. I camped tucked in a fringe of dwarf pines near a lake that threw back the last light like it wanted to keep it. Food hung high. Routine, routine, routine. Day 2 started to stretch me. The further I got from the clusters of people, the more the trail thinned and braided. Shadows got taller even when the sun was still high. I kept having the sense I should look over my shoulder, not because of anything I heard, just because the emptiness felt sentient. By late afternoon, the wind knifed down the pass and made silence into a sound. I slept anyway, sore in the good way. On day 3, I lost the trail for the first time. Not for long, half an hour of wrong rocks and wrong brush. Then backtrack, breathe, find the faint groove you missed because you were thinking about something that doesn't matter out here. My left heel gave up and blistered. I doctored it with tape and swore I'd break in boots properly next time. Around 5, I found a grove that looked designed by some benevolent ranger. Soft bed of needles, granite slab for a kitchen, a stream's voice close enough to hear, but not to splash you in the night. It felt earned. I made dinner, set my little things in their places, and drank tea. I always leave the mug in the same spot, a flat patch of granite exactly 18 inches from the fire ring, because small rituals make outsiders, and the inside of my head behave. I cleaned my pot, checked that the food bag swung free, made one slow circuit of camp, then zipped myself into nylon and sleep like a light switch. If anything happened that night, I didn't notice. I woke early to the gray that isn't morning, only the idea of it. The air inside the tent had that damp cold that makes you hold your breath and watch it cloud. I lay there counting out a plan for the day, coffee, water, check the map, climb the ridge behind camp for a look, until my back asked me to move. I unzipped into a cold that made my fingers flinch and stepped out. The mug wasn't where I left it. I scanned the slab, then the ring, then the ground around it, ready to laugh at myself for being dramatic so early. It took me too long to see it. Perched upright on a fallen log 10 meters from the fire ring, balanced like a little silver coin on edge. Annoyance came first, then the kind of focus that makes sound drop out of the world. I walked to it slowly, not because I thought something would spring from the brush, but because it felt like walking into a room where someone else had been and might still be. I picked up the mug. Inside, 50, 60 pine needles sat nested in concentric circles, tight, precise, one ring inside another, like someone had used a ruler on a thing that doesn't need measuring. The pattern was careful in a way that felt wrong for everywhere and everything around it. I crouched and looked for prints. The dirt here was too armored, pebbles, old needles, hardpan, to hold anything clear. No boot edges, no scuffs telegraphing weight and direction. I checked the hang of my food. Untouched. My knife and headlamp were where I left them. The only thing wrong in the world was a stainless steel mug that had been moved and filled with a pattern I couldn't call a prank because there wasn't anyone here to pull one. Logic fought panic and won barely. Maybe someone else had camped nearby, saw my sight, wanted to spook me. Maybe I'd been too proud about secrecy, too cavalier about distance from the trail. I told myself a dozen explanations and didn't believe any of them. The silence went from neutral to hostile in a breath. I packed deliberately. Bag rolled, stove cool and stowed, bear hang down and loaded, laces double knotted with a sailor's concentration. I left the mug empty on the granite slab, as if putting it back could rewind whatever I'd walked into. Before I shouldered my pack, I decided to climb the ridge behind camp, just to see. A bad idea done for a good reason feels almost responsible. I picked my way up for 40 minutes, hands on stone, breath white even though the day was warming. The ridge gave me distance in every direction. Green poured into green, ridges like folded paper, the faint scratch of trail to the east like an old pencil line you can't erase. I turned slowly with the binoculars, glassing every clearing, every gap where sky could meet color and make a tent shape. Nothing. I swept again, narrower. Nothing. I swept a third time because the first two felt like lies. Nothing. Standing on a high point at midday makes you a diagram of a target. It hit me too late that if someone had eyes on me, they'd have me framed clean against the sky. I crouched behind a rock until my heart agreed to be a muscle again and not a hand banging on a locked door. Decision made itself, 15 miles back the way I came. I put the ridge to my back and moved fast, keeping the kind of pace you pay for later. Everything in the trees felt like it had the right to be there except me. Every time I checked my 6 I saw nothing, and still felt watched. I rationed water in a way that would make a ranger scold me. I passed good streams without stopping because the idea of kneeling, head down, felt like exposing my neck. The day thinned into evening, and then into the color that isn't a color. The trail widened near the outpost, as if the land wanted me to do the rational thing. My headlamp threw a jumpy cone and turned saplings into people who became saplings again. My blister popped, and then didn't matter. I didn't smell smoke, but I felt the idea of it. When the ranger station roofline finally appeared as a darker dark against the trees, I almost ran, and then didn't because running felt like announcing I had a reason to. I knocked and heard my own hand first. An older ranger opened the door, and for a second I couldn't make words arrange themselves. He took one look at my face, stepped aside, and let the warm, humming light do a kind thing to my nervous system. I told him the story in order because order felt like safety. Where I camped, what I ate, where the mug lived and where it didn't, what was inside it, the climb, the scan, the negative space where people should have been. He didn't smile or scoff. He just nodded like he was ticking boxes in his head. People live out there longer than you'd think, he said when I finished, the voice of someone who has said this before and hates that he has to say it again. Sometimes off-season, sometimes all-season. They get territorial. They leave messages. He glanced at my hands like he expected to see sap or dirt that would prove something. Circles with needles, we've had that reported. Means I see you. Means not here. Depends who you ask. Something in me wanted a name, a label you could put on a clipboard to make a human out of a shape and a shape out of a fear. He didn't give me one. He did give me water, a protein bar that tasted exactly like chalk in a good way, and a form to fill out. I wrote slow, so I wouldn't write more than I meant to. He radioed another unit and told them to sweep the area at first light. You did right leaving, he said, which sounded like a grade and a benediction. I sat in a plastic chair under a corkboard full of trail closures and elk sightings, listening to the radio hiss and pop. The station smelled like coffee and wet wool and pencil shavings. I stared at my hands and the little black lines of dirt in the creases and wondered, briefly and wildly, if I'd made the circles myself in my sleep and then remembered the log, the distance, the absence of prints. The ranger handed me a wool blanket, even though I wasn't cold, and told me I could crash on the bench if I wanted. I did. I woke to dawn the color of paper, and a taste in my mouth like I'd been chewing a penny. We drove back to the site after sunup, 2 rangers and me, with that quiet men use when they don't want to spook a thing that isn't an animal. The grove looked like a small stage set torn down incorrectly. My tent footprint was a pale rectangle. The hang line still swayed slightly, though there was no wind to talk to it. The granite slab was empty except for a faint ring where my mug had sweat in the chill. The needles that had been inside it lay scattered in random angles now, as if the pattern had been unrolled back into chaos. The rangers circled outward, finding what the ground would give. "Hard," one said, touching the crusted dirt. He photographed knot prints and a scuff that might have been a knee, and might have been my knee. He took notes anyway. On the walk out, he didn't offer theories, and I didn't ask for any. A mile from the station we passed a trail junction, where someone had built 3 small cairns on the post, one atop the other like stacked vertebrae. It could have meant nothing. I looked away first. I filed the report, repacked my gear, and drove until the park turned into the kind of highway where your brain gets to idle. When I stopped for gas, I pulled the mug out of the side pocket where I'd shoved it and held it as if it might still be warm from a hand I didn't see. It was, of course, metal at room temperature. I put it back and didn't throw it away, because throwing it away felt like pretending none of it happened, and I'm done pretending. When I was 35, everything in my life came apart like a zipper you keep forcing the wrong way. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday. By Friday, my boss said the company was pivoting, and I wouldn't be part of it. I packed my desk into a cardboard box and carried it to the car in the kind of fluorescent afternoon that flattens your mood. It felt less like a bad week and more like a trapdoor giving out under me. 2 mornings later, I booked a long-term cabin near Salida, Colorado, and told myself I'd spend 2 months in the mountains and figure out what was left. It seemed impulsive until I was signing the last set of papers with my ex under those humming lights. After that, leaving felt like the only thing that made sense. I sublet the apartment, stacked books in storage, taped up a few boxes of clothes and a battered tent I hadn't used in years. The air in Denver felt heavier than usual the day I left. I drove west with the radio off. The first month I didn't go alone. I met up with a group from an outdoors forum at a trailhead west of Buena Vista. For men, 2 women, the kind of people who know exactly where the dry needles hide under rain-soaked logs. They were patient. At night we traded packets of rice and jokes. In daylight they drilled me on basics I thought I knew and didn't. I learned to coax fire from damp tinder, to find north with a broken compass by reading the sky, to wrap a splint out of branches and tape when someone rolls an ankle. An EMT named Sarah showed me how to check pulses without looking like I was checking. An older guy, Mike, drew lines between stars with a blunt pencil on a map and made me trace them back with my eyes until it felt easy. They made me lead more than felt comfortable. By the end of the month, I could move in the woods without narrating every step to myself. Then they all headed home to jobs and spouses and kids' schedules, and I stayed. The plan was another month deeper in San Isabel. I picked a flat spot on a small rise above a creek, far from the trail, a place you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. The tent went up straight. The bare canister hung cleanly from a branch I could barely reach. My little systems made me feel steady. Water filtered, coffee boiled, food double-bagged, fire ring cold before sleep. Days were simple. Hike, collect firewood, move, watch shadows crawl the valley walls, eat. I kept lists so my hands had something to do. On the 4th night something changed. I woke to a muffled scraping outside the tent. Not panic loud, just close enough to rearrange my heartbeat. I lay still and let the noise write itself into my head, branches shifting, a weight brushing the fabric, a slow push through needles. I told myself deer, raccoon, anything with a normal name. Morning proved only that something had been curious. The bare canister had fresh scratches. My spoon was missing. A few wrappers lay open like flowers on the ground. I cleaned every bit in a tight circle and moved the canister higher, tighter, more knots. The next night the noises came back, heavier steps this time, branches popping, something circling where the firelight used to be. I kept rerunning the first month's lessons in my head like a ward. Store food away, make noise, keep a clean camp. It helped until it didn't. By the 5th night the noises learned my name. Not words at first, just a cadence like speech blown thin by wind. Then the voices took on shapes I recognized. My ex-wife's voice, cold and pointed, the way it got at the end. Then my boss's flat tone, the one he used when he'd already made a decision and wanted me to hear it as a favor. They came from different places in the trees. Sometimes behind my tent flap. Sometimes from the creek. You'll never make it on your own, hers said. You've always been slow, his said. I told myself to ignore it and realized I was answering out loud. Leave me alone, I said to the dark, then heard how that sounded. I added bells on strings around the tent, a dumb perimeter that felt smart at midnight. I started sleeping in my boots with my knife inside the bag, because my hands wanted something to hold. In the daylight I kept busy. Cut wood, refill water, pack and repack, patrol the small circle of trampled ground like a security guard. Fatigue put a high whine in my ears. Every twig became a footstep. Every gust of air became someone's breath. When I closed my eyes, I saw faces in the tent fabric and opened them to the same faces lighter. On the 7th night, the wind found a direction and carried the voices all at once. They argued. They laughed. They lined up memories in a row and flicked them at me. I saw a figure then, 50 yards off, just inside the edge of dark, backlit by a thread of fire I'd banked to coals. A person-shaped stillness swaying between trees. It didn't move and didn't need to. Something in me broke cleanly. I grabbed my headlamp and a half bottle of water and ran. Branches whipped my arms and left wet lines. Roots lifted my feet for me. My headlamp went hard to dim and then died, which felt biblical. The forest thinned without getting friendlier. Moonlight gave me edges to trip over. I didn't look behind me because I didn't want to know what was there. Fear put a hot wire through the center of my chest and tugged me forward until the ground leveled into a field and a fence took shape ahead. I woke in pieces, first to cold, then to the idea of dawn, then to a man's voice asking if I needed help. A farmer in a dusty jacket stood a few steps away with a thermos. He watched me like you watch a stray dog you want to help without getting bit. He walked me to his house without questions. His name was Jim. The kitchen smelled like coffee and hay. He put a chipped mug in front of me and a damp towel, and didn't say anything else until my hands stopped shaking enough to hold the cup. I told him the short version, then the long one. He listened like a rope around a post. Nothing dramatic, no slack. When I was done, he told me about his nephew who'd lived out by himself for a while, and started hearing people he loved say things they never would have said. He told me about hunters who convinced themselves something was pacing them when it was only their breath bouncing off trees. Out here, alone can get loud, he said. It uses the voices you'll listen to. I stayed 2 days at Jim's place, helping with chores like I remembered how, mending fence, hauling feed, using muscle in ways that shut my head up for an hour at a time. He let me sleep in a spare room with thin curtains that let the morning in honest. He didn't call me crazy. He didn't call me brave. He drove me to town when I was ready and dropped me at the bus station with a paper bag of sandwiches his sister had made, as if I were heading to school. Back in Denver, I booked a counseling appointment, and then another. I started to say the true things in rooms where saying them didn't cost more than I had to spend. Group therapy introduced me to people with different lives and the same wobble. Nurses, students, retirees. We didn't trade ghost stories, so much as map the places our heads had turned on us and the way back. Months later, I could talk about the tent and the voices and the figure in the trees without that wire returning to my chest. Years later, I started helping run a support group, the circle of chairs and echo I could live with. I went out there because I wanted to hear nothing. Not phone buzz, not traffic hiss, not the wet cough of an espresso machine. Just the creek, the wind, and my own breathing. I parked where the road ran out, hiked a few miles in, and found a little rise by a narrow stream. Tall pines, flat tent pad, a couple of old fire rings like fossilized parties. I set the tent with my back to the boulders, fly snug, lines tight, bearkin stashed 30 or 40 feet off. Ritual made easy by repetition. Stove, tea, notebook, the small thrill of getting it right. By dusk the site was a tiny orange island in a big black sea. I sipped mint tea and felt the day unwind in my legs. The first real quiet hit me like medicine. I crawled into the bag warm and smug, listened to the creek for a while, and let the dark close its hand. Somewhere between awake and asleep, a thought drifted through. You did it, you're really alone out here. And it felt good. Then the forest changed temperature. I know how woods sound. I pay attention. You hear the wind move up in the crown. You hear needles tick the ground. You hear one twig snap, and your brain checks the box labeled deer. This was different. It started as a tiny, deliberate noise, a fingertip following a seam. SCRR pause SCRR. If you've ever eased a nail along nylon, you know the tone. Too measured to be branches. Too close to be anything but a hand. I stopped breathing. The sound stopped too. Silence did that ringing thing like after a loud concert. A minute later, something pressed into the tent wall near my shoulder. Not a slam. A slow, curious push, like someone testing the firmness of a fruit at the market. I slid my hand to the flashlight and flashed the inside of the tent because it gave me the illusion of control. Boots. Bag. SOS device in the lid pocket, a little orange tombstone waiting to be touched. I told myself it was nothing. New place jitters. Wind. Sleep would wash it away. It didn't. I lay there wired until the sky started to pale. When I finally unzipped, the air snapped cold and clean and honest. I did a lazy lap of the site to prove to myself I'd overreacted. I hadn't. Near the base of the tent, the light caught a hairline glitter. I crouched. There was a cut, 2-3 centimeters long, straight as a ruler. If you've ever nicked nylon, you know the look of a sharp, careful blade. I ran my fingernail along it and felt my scalp tighten. That wasn't wind. That wasn't claws. That was a test. My brain went clinical. I started looking for prints. At first I didn't see them. Then at the soft edge of a damp patch, I found one. Half a boot tread, chevrons, and a small rock nicked into the heel. I found another. And another. They tracked in a faint ring around the tent. I paced them off with my GPS watch to keep my hands from shaking. 9 meters. 11. 9 again. Whoever it was had orbited me like a planet, keeping a fixed distance the way hunters do when they don't want their scent to blow across a clearing. That's when I saw the twig. It was nothing, which made it everything. One straight, barkless stick laid exactly parallel to my tent's zipper. Not dropped. Not random. Placed with the kind of care you'd use to set down a scalpel on a tray. It read like a bookmark. I was here. This is the line that opens you. My breath did a little hitch. I felt stupid and exposed and angry all at once. I yanked the SOS device from the pack and stood there weighing it. Hit the button and you're not alone anymore. Hit the button and you admit the story you're in. Before I could decide, the sound returned. Soft. Almost polite. Zip, zip, zip. It came from the tent's far side, the side I wasn't facing when I slept. The knife wasn't at the test slit. It was making a new one. The cut went slow, patient, the way you work when you don't want to tear, only open. I slid backward until my heels hit the bag and stabbed the SOS button with my thumb. The device vibrated once, green LED blinking like a heartbeat. The slicing stopped. I could hear my own breath. That was all. No running, no whispering, no charge. Just the kind of silence that's heavy enough to hurt. I pressed into the back wall of the tent until the poles complained and tried to be as small as a pulse. The helicopter started as a rumor and grew teeth. Rotor wash shoved the trees around. A searchlight burned through the branches, and the tent turned briefly to milk. I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted salt. Somebody's radio cracked open right outside, a voice so matter-of-fact it made me shiver. Command, code 43. Same MO as last week. Same MO as last week. There was a file for this. A code. I felt that sentence all the way down to my feet. Another voice followed, clipped and calm. Perimeter sweep. Extraction commencing. Then, like a door shut quietly in a house where someone's sleeping, false alarm command. Copy. Just wind on canvas. Sure. Wind that carries a blade. 2 rangers ghosted in through the blown leaves. Helmets, visors, hands empty but not unready. One crouched and touched the little slit with a gloved fingertip. Her jaw flexed once. She clocked the twig without seeming to move her eyes. Neither of them said Jesus or holy shit or anything like that. Professionals have poker faces. They got me out, asked my name, checked me for blood, hustled me into the belly of the bird. The light returned to the ground like a benediction. The tent looked small and slumped and stupid with its neat zipper and its precise little wound. In the station, everything smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. I gave my story clean. Scrape, thud, test slit, boot ring spaced at 9 to 11 meters, twig aligned to zipper, the cut beginning on the far side, the SOS, the pause. Pens moved, printers hiccuped. People exchanged those micro glances you only notice when you're watching for them. A senior ranger with a map tucked under his arm finally said, "We've had a few similar incidents lately." He didn't look at me when he said it. Isolated, we thought. Opportunistic. The precision is concerning. He didn't repeat code 43. When I asked about it, he checked the clock like time was an answer and said, "We try not to cause panic." I get the impulse. Panic people do dumb things in the woods. But there's a difference between avoiding panic and downplaying a pattern. Someone out there likes lines precise and knives slow. They orbit tents at fixed distances, leave little messages aligned to zippers, and make quiet doors in other people's nights. People ask if I'll go back out alone. I don't know how to answer them without sounding dramatic. The wilderness didn't betray me. It's still what it was, beautiful and different, full of things that don't care if you're scared. What changed is what I bring to it. I still hear the creak in my head, but now I also hear zip, zip, zip if a jacket rustles wrong in a quiet room. I still love the way stars look far from town, but I don't use a thin tent wall to feel safe. I carry the beacon where my hand can find it in the dark. I pace my sights. I look for lines that are too neat. I pitched my tent on a nameless blue eye of water tucked off the Highline Trail, the kind of place you only find by committing to bad topo guesses and a few scratched shins. Glacier at night is a cathedral with the lights off. The owl out there kept time, the lake lapped the shore like a sleepy dog, and my brain finally shut up after a day of climbing and cussing at switchbacks. I brewed chamomile in my dented steel mug, lay back, and watched the Milky Way through the bug-net roof. My socks stank, my shoulders throbbed, and it felt perfect, simple, feral, clean. I pissed in the dark, cinched the vestibule, slid into the bag, and went under hard. Somewhere past moonset, the air thickened like a held breath. I didn't wake, just shifted once, dreaming of snowfields. A few things happened while I didn't. A water bottle rolled a foot the wrong way. A log in my woodpile pivoted 90 degrees. A scuff appeared in wet duff like a fingertip drawn through flour. Tiny edits, careful as a librarian's notes. Dawn cracked the peaks pink. I crawled out, stretched until my hips popped, and started my dumb morning ballet. Filter water, fire stove, line up the day's rations like a quartermaster. That's when the itch lit up the back of my neck. My fuel canister sat an inch left of where I'd set it. The sleeping bag zipper gaped another tooth. Did I? Maybe. Then I reached for my mug. Inside was a pattern, pine needles laid in concentric rings, each twiglet aligned as if placed with tweezers. It was delicate, precise, obsessive. I almost laughed until my hiker brain matched the geometry. Those rings looked like the contour lines I'd studied last night, stacked tight where the slope steepened, breathing apart where it gentled. I held the mug, and my coffee went cold. The mandala was beautiful, and it did not belong. I packed hard. By noon I hit a ranger cabin at a junction, and my mouth ran without permission. Ranger Davis, beard like a woodpile, crow's feet cut by 100 winters, listened with that flat, steady attention of someone who's already decided if you're full of it. He wasn't amused, and he wasn't surprised. "Sounds like you met a shadow," he said, eyes on the tree line, voice low enough that it felt impolite to interrupt. "Some folks live out here. Off the map, off the grid. Territorial. Smart. They mark. Subtle stuff. You saw it." I said, "Like a hermit?" He shrugged. "Call him what you want. He's been walking these ridges longer than I've been taking idiot selfies for lost influencers. You keep moving. Don't go poking. Not a ghost story. Not a bear. A person. That should have made me feel safer. It didn't." I pushed west on a lonelier cut of the Highline, appetite gone, senses blown wide. Every twig snap rang like a drop plate. Hours later, legs jelly, I stopped on a boulder with a view that punched me behind the eyes. Valley rolled out like a green sea. Ice clinging to the far cirque like a torn flag. My palm found grit, then a smear of fresh charcoal. On the rock, I slash. 5 marks. A tally. Dust still smudged under my thumb. He'd been here. Recently. Counting days? Camps? Me? That night I tucked into a tarn so clear it looked fake, way off my plan. I set camp with the neatness of a soldier trying to control weather. I reached for my spare mug, same model as last night's, bottom still black with old coffee scars. Another mandala sat inside. Same concentric rings, same obsessive touch. Except one ring was missing, as if someone had erased a contour band. I felt it in my gut before I processed it with my head. A step taken, a line crossed. Somewhere, some checkpoint had ticked over. I slept like a hostage, waking at every leaf hush. Pre-dawn, pollen turned the tent fly to paper gold. When I unzipped and shook the frost, something light sifted down and paused my pulse. The same pine needle mandala ghosted across my fly in yellow dust, perfect as a stamp. The air had done the marking, or he had taught the air to. My breath fogged, the pattern blurred, and I knew I was done pretending this was quirky. I was being seen, spoken to, warned, maybe all three. I bailed uphill. My route bent toward a jagged black tooth I'd been eyeing since the first day, a peak that pinned the horizon with bad intentions. The climb sucked, scree sliding, calves on fire, wind punching at the ribs. I moved on adrenaline, caffeine, and the kind of scared that feels like electricity and tastes like metal. When the ridge finally flattened into a shoulder of rock, I staggered on, then dropped to my ass because my legs forgot how to be legs. The summit's edge held a little altar. Not religious, exactly, more like a thesis. A cairn of hand-sized stones ringed a mandala finer than any yet, pine needles nested in impossible curves. Beside it, a line of river stones polished like bone, and a small pile of dried berries gone black and sweet. A gift? An offering? A claim? Wind licked my ears. In the scrag of old pines just off the crown, branches whispered out of sync with the gusts. Something unhooked from shadow and stood. Not a monster. A person layered in drab fabric and silence, height hard to judge, face blocked by sun and the brim of something homemade. The shape had the economy of someone who did not waste anything. Not heat, not motion, not words. We stood there breathing. My heart slammed loud enough I wondered if he could hear it. I said nothing, he said nothing. The only language going was arrangement. Stones, needles, berries, my dumb, loud body. Fear thinned to something like awe or nausea. I gave the smallest nod I've ever given, the kind you use for wild animals and funeral flags. The figure didn't move. I backed away, then turned, and the mountain let me leave. The descent rewired me. The fear didn't vanish, it changed flavors. I started noticing the way logs fell in lines that weren't random, the way elk prints braided into a guide rope through bog, the way wind could carry meaning without carrying words. At a sparse junction I'd never noticed before, a gray sign read backcountry access, caution advised. At its base, almost invisible, one pine needle lay perfectly straight, pointing toward the easier trail like an arrow cut from the world itself. By the time I hit the busy part of the park, bright jackets, trekking poles, the music of civilization leaking from an overpriced day pack, I felt both relieved and vaguely wrong. The world of bars and notifications didn't fit right for a while. Back home, I unpacked, washed everything twice, then put the two mugs on a shelf by themselves like dangerous books. I came to San Isabel to disappear, post-divorce, lungs full of courtroom air, heart like a cracked ashtray. A friend knew a remote cabin, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. The first nights, the quiet felt like medicine. Creek hiss, wind in the aspens, stove ticking as it cooled. I clung to tiny rituals like they were life preservers. Pour grounds, boil water, stir, watch the bloom. Fry an egg, sweep the grit from the plank floor. I wrote every evening, dates and temperatures and little notes about hawks and clouds, as if facts could fence the mind. Sleep didn't stick. I'd crash for an hour, wake wired, pace the cold floorboards barefoot, piss behind the cabin under a sky so loud with stars it felt obscene. The mountains were supposed to be impartial, but the silence got teeth, it chewed. Small shifts came first. A shadow that didn't belong to any tree, a rustle that wore a rhythm familiar as a ringtone. I told myself I was decompressing. I'd been the unreliable one for years, according to my ex. Now the word floated up out of the pines like steam off a hot road. Then the wind learned her voice. It started like pareidolia, sibilants and vowels woven through leaves. I laughed at myself. The next night it had cadence, her clipped patience, the exact up-tilt when she said, "You're dramatic." By the third, the words landed clean and barbed. Unreliable. Always late. Make it about you. The gusts carried old fights into the doorway and left them there like dead mice. I jammed my beanie down and worked harder. Split wood, reorganized shelves, scrubbed the counter until my hands throbbed. It didn't help. Sleep broke into stupors. My heart ran sprints at 3 a.m. My hands shook when I lit the stove. I checked the door 3 times, then a 4th, then counted in 8s so I could stop. The woods pressed up against the glass like breath. On the 5th day, without deciding to, I walked. No pack, just a thermos and the stupid bravado of someone too tired to be careful. The game trail behind the cabin turned unfamiliar after the first bend, the pines leaning in like a crowd. I cut left and right, following nothing. When the trees opened, it was onto a clearing I swear was new. In the center, a waist-high ring of stones, moss-bloomed and patient. It looked ancient, ceremonial. I stood half smirking at my own melodrama until I saw my battered cooking pot sitting dead center, nested so perfectly into a gap it might have been measured for it. I hadn't brought it. I didn't remember taking it out. There it was, blackened, handle bent, like a joke from a stranger who knew my kitchen better than I did. I reached in and lifted it. The fit had that eerie frictionless rightness of a key turning. Panic crawled up my back. I tried to retrace my route. The woods had rearranged themselves into a maze with no walls. By the time I stumbled home, dusk had a blade in it. That night I drank 2 fingers too much rye and still couldn't knock myself out. The wind waited until I closed my eyes. "There you go again," it breathed. "Always the victim." I jammed my fists to my ears and still heard it in bone. I yanked on boots and drove. Farmer Jim's place set off a washboard dirt track, porch light a yellow coin in the dark. He was on the steps before I killed the engine, weathered and watchful like the mountains had poured themselves into one man. "Heard you coming," he said. "From up the ridge." He pointed behind me, toward the wilder country I hadn't driven through. The scalp-tight chill of that simple sentence nearly buckled my knees. Inside, he poured coffee the color of engine oil and listened while I talked too fast. The voice in the wind, the sleeplessness, the stone circle with my pot sitting in it like a crown jewel. He didn't flinch. "Mountains play tricks," he said finally. "Isolation does too. After a split, it'll make a choir out of one voice. Keep your feet on what you can touch." He told me to eat real meals, to sleep where other roofs were if I had to put my hands in work that bites back. A fence staple, a shovel, a horse's flank. He didn't call me crazy. He didn't call me haunted. He called it being human out past the noise. The next morning I meant to prove something to myself. What, exactly, I couldn't say. I went looking for the stone circle in clear daylight. The woods smelled wet metallic, like rain not yet arrived. Every leaf sounded like a whisper, every shadow half human. The GPS screen bounced in my palm, blue arrow smug as a shark fin. My chest got that icy ache it gets right before you cry or throw up. I told myself I'd go a little farther, just to the next rise, just to the bend. I ran. Panic isn't clever. It's a dog let off the chain. I sprinted until my thighs burned, and the ridge line tilted like a set pulled crooked. The wind quit pretending and took on a crowd. Her voice braided with others, a chorus of unreliable and reliable and reliable until the word lost its edges and became a pulse. I tripped. I laughed, sharp and stupid. I kept moving because stillness felt like consent. When the cabin finally showed, a dark square in trees, I nearly sobbed. I collapsed on the steps and dragged the GPS up like a holy text that would prove I'd taken one stupid, scared line through the woods. The track rendered in pink. Not a line. Loops. Over and over, almost elegant, figure eights stitched end to end, as if I'd been circling some invisible stakes. I had no memory of doubling back, much less tracing something so neat. I stared until the shapes blurred, until the device felt hot in my hand. Either the wilderness had glitched my tech, or my body had obeyed a map my brain couldn't see. That little screen stole one of my last anchors. I couldn't trust my feet or my eyes. I went back to Jim because leaving the mountain felt too big to manage alone. He was mending a fence, hands raw, shirt stained with a day's honest work. The smell of dirt and hay and diesel grounded me faster than any breathing exercise. I laid it all out, the loops, the whispers, the pot thrown in the stone circle. He didn't make it mystical. He made it mortal. "You're grieving," he said. "Sleep-starved, alone, and listening to the last person who trained your ears to their pitch. Brains hate silence. They'll put a radio on where there isn't one. Go home. Talk to someone paid to listen." I packed that night. Tossed the pot in a box like it might bite. Locked the door that never really locked, and left the key where I found it. The road out unwound through beauty I could almost see again without loading it with omen. I kept my eyes on the shoulder lines, on the burn of the steering wheel under my palms, on the ordinary miracle of gas stations and other people's taillights. Back in a town with sirens and bakeries and trash day, I booked therapy. I sat on a couch that didn't move and talked about sleep debt, about nervous systems stuck on, about how divorce is a slow-motion car wreck that leaves wreckage you only notice when it's quiet. We named the wind for what it was, memory with a megaphone. We named the figure eights, panic carving patterns. We left room for the unprovable and still refused to hand my life to ghosts. Months out, I'm less ghost myself. I eat at tables with friends. I sleep most nights. Sometimes the trash truck sets my heart sprinting, and I laugh at it instead of hiding. I paint badly. I grow tomatoes that split their skins and taste like August. I pitched my tent on a nameless blue eye of water tucked off the Highline Trail, the kind of place you only find by committing to bad topo guesses and a few scratched shins. Glacier at night is a cathedral with the lights off. The owl out there kept time, the lake lapped the shore like a sleepy dog, and my brain finally shut up after a day of climbing and cussing at switchbacks. I brewed chamomile in my dented steel mug, lay back, and watched the Milky Way through the bug-net roof. My socks stank, my shoulders throbbed, and it felt perfect, simple, feral, clean. I pissed in the dark, cinched the vestibule, slid into the bag, and went under hard. Somewhere past moonset, the air thickened like a held breath. I didn't wake, just shifted once, dreaming of snowfields. A few things happened while I didn't. A water bottle rolled a foot the wrong way. A log in my woodpile pivoted 90 degrees. A scuff appeared in wet duff like a fingertip drawn through flour. Tiny edits, careful as a librarian's notes. Dawn cracked the peaks pink. I crawled out, stretched until my hips popped, and started my dumb morning ballet. Filter water, fire stove, line up the day's rations like a quartermaster. That's when the itch lit up the back of my neck. My fuel canister sat an inch left of where I'd set it. The sleeping bag zipper gaped another tooth. Did I? Maybe. Then I reached for my mug. Inside was a pattern, pine needles laid in concentric rings, each twiglet aligned as if placed with tweezers. It was delicate, precise, obsessive. I almost laughed until my hiker brain matched the geometry. Those rings looked like the contour lines I'd studied last night, stacked tight where the slope steepened, breathing apart where it gentled. I held the mug, and my coffee went cold. The mandala was beautiful, and it did not belong. I packed hard. By noon I hit a ranger cabin at a junction, and my mouth ran without permission. Ranger Davis, beard like a woodpile, crow's feet cut by 100 winters, listened with that flat, steady attention of someone who's already decided if you're full of it. He wasn't amused, and he wasn't surprised. "Sounds like you met a shadow," he said, eyes on the tree line, voice low enough that it felt impolite to interrupt. "Some folks live out here. Off the map, off the grid. Territorial. Smart. They mark. Subtle stuff. You saw it." I said, "Like a hermit?" He shrugged. "Call him what you want. He's been walking these ridges longer than I've been taking idiot selfies for lost influencers. You keep moving. Don't go poking. Not a ghost story. Not a bear. A person. That should have made me feel safer. It didn't." I pushed west on a lonelier cut of the Highline, appetite gone, senses blown wide. Every twig snap rang like a drop plate. Hours later, legs jelly, I stopped on a boulder with a view that punched me behind the eyes. Valley rolled out like a green sea. Ice clinging to the far cirque like a torn flag. My palm found grit, then a smear of fresh charcoal. On the rock, I slash. 5 marks. A tally. Dust still smudged under my thumb. He'd been here. Recently. Counting days? Camps? Me? That night I tucked into a tarn so clear it looked fake, way off my plan. I set camp with the neatness of a soldier trying to control weather. I reached for my spare mug, same model as last night's, bottom still black with old coffee scars. Another mandala sat inside. Same concentric rings, same obsessive touch. Except one ring was missing, as if someone had erased a contour band. I felt it in my gut before I processed it with my head. A step taken, a line crossed. Somewhere, some checkpoint had ticked over. I slept like a hostage, waking at every leaf hush. Pre-dawn, pollen turned the tent fly to paper gold. When I unzipped and shook the frost, something light sifted down and paused my pulse. The same pine needle mandala ghosted across my fly in yellow dust, perfect as a stamp. The air had done the marking, or he had taught the air to. My breath fogged, the pattern blurred, and I knew I was done pretending this was quirky. I was being seen, spoken to, warned, maybe all three. I bailed uphill. My route bent toward a jagged black tooth I'd been eyeing since the first day, a peak that pinned the horizon with bad intentions. The climb sucked, scree sliding, calves on fire, wind punching at the ribs. I moved on adrenaline, caffeine, and the kind of scared that feels like electricity and tastes like metal. When the ridge finally flattened into a shoulder of rock, I staggered on, then dropped to my ass because my legs forgot how to be legs. The summit's edge held a little altar. Not religious, exactly, more like a thesis. A cairn of hand-sized stones ringed a mandala finer than any yet, pine needles nested in impossible curves. Beside it, a line of river stones polished like bone, and a small pile of dried berries gone black and sweet. A gift? An offering? A claim? Wind licked my ears. In the scrag of old pines just off the crown, branches whispered out of sync with the gusts. Something unhooked from shadow and stood. Not a monster. A person layered in drab fabric and silence, height hard to judge, face blocked by sun and the brim of something homemade. The shape had the economy of someone who did not waste anything. Not heat, not motion, not words. We stood there breathing. My heart slammed loud enough I wondered if he could hear it. I said nothing, he said nothing. The only language going was arrangement. Stones, needles, berries, my dumb, loud body. Fear thinned to something like awe or nausea. I gave the smallest nod I've ever given, the kind you use for wild animals and funeral flags. The figure didn't move. I backed away, then turned, and the mountain let me leave. The descent rewired me. The fear didn't vanish, it changed flavors. I started noticing the way logs fell in lines that weren't random, the way elk prints braided into a guide rope through bog, the way wind could carry meaning without carrying words. At a sparse junction I'd never noticed before, a gray sign read backcountry access, caution advised. At its base, almost invisible, one pine needle lay perfectly straight, pointing toward the easier trail like an arrow cut from the world itself. By the time I hit the busy part of the park, bright jackets, trekking poles, the music of civilization leaking from an overpriced day pack, I felt both relieved and vaguely wrong. The world of bars and notifications didn't fit right for a while. Back home, I unpacked, washed everything twice, then put the 2 mugs on a shelf by themselves like dangerous books. I remember the Smokies first as a green ocean, ridge after ridge breathing mist, our little European tour group bobbing along in a rented minivan while Hans Muller narrated like a proud uncle. We'd spent the morning hopping overlooks on the Blue Ridge Parkway, photographing waterfalls and pretending we weren't jet-lagged. By mid-afternoon we stank of rain, sweat, and novelty. A real American campground, Hans promised, tapping his printout. Showers, lockers, authentic. I wanted hot water in 5 minutes without anyone's camera. I wanted to peel off my damp clothes and feel human again. The building looked like a school gym that lost its students, cinder block, fluorescent lights, a faint chlorine tang that didn't match the forest. Signs said registered campers only, but Hans breezed past them with a confident, "It is fine." 10 of us spilled in, all elbows in backpacks. I ducked into a row of lockers, kicked off muddy boots, and stripped to my underwear behind the open door. Steam drifted from running taps, mirrors fogged, and the tile felt cold under my bare feet. It was the kind of communal awkward that makes you crack bad jokes. Someone quipped about Americans and their rules, and I muttered a tired skice when my sports bra stuck to my ribs. That's when Park Ranger Alara Vance pushed in, boots squeaking, uniform neat, expression patient. The room snapped to attention like we'd all been caught smoking. "Afternoon," she said, voice calm but carrying. "These facilities are for registered campers at the adjacent sites. Are you checked in?" Hans tried charm. "We are only visitors. A quick refresh, then we go." Alara explained resource management and rules with the kind of politeness that leaves no gap to argue. I yanked my shirt on over damp skin, cheeks burning. "We'll move along," Hans conceded. As we gathered our mess, something tugged my attention. In the mirror over the sinks, above the fog, a handprint smudged the glass, long, splayed, higher than any of us could have reached without tiptoeing or a bench. It looked old and fresh at once, like it had grown there. I wiped my palms on my trousers, suddenly aware of my heartbeat, and told myself it was humidity, a trick of light. Outside, the air felt cooler, cleaner, and I breathed it like medicine. We clustered by the van. Hans was apologizing to us and to Alara in alternating sentences, trying to save face. While he talked, I heard it, a thin, reedy whistle from inside the building, not wind through trees but air threading metal. I turned. The rows of metal lockers had those slatted vents, and the sound seemed to breathe through them, drawn, released, drawn again, like someone exhaling in the gap. "Do you hear that?" I asked Hans. He cocked his head, frowned, and then shrugged. "Older buildings," he said, but it was too intentional. The group went quiet, as if we'd all agreed not to feed it. The whistling pulsed on, a little private metronome. My skin prickled. We started tossing bags into the back. A pack of American campers wandered up, laughing, towels over shoulders. One loud guy said, "Man, those Europeans are always up to something, aren't they?" Another chuckled, "Yes, sneaking into places they shouldn't ha." The cadence made me flinch. It was our earlier grumbles, bent into a local drawl. Not just similar, close enough to feel stolen. I caught Anya's eye, she'd heard it too. The funny part of being in the wrong place wasn't funny anymore. We finally loaded up and pulled out, tires crunching gravel. I watched through the rear window. The campers were halfway down the path, talking, but their words slid, like tape spooling backward. The breeze carried a voice that wasn't theirs, low, rough, and Americanized, speaking Hans's exact line from 10 minutes earlier. "We are visitors, enjoying the beauty. We seek only a quick refresh." It hit me in the spine. "Hans," I whispered, grabbing his arm. He started to say it was nothing, then went quiet, knuckles whitening on the wheel. The same phrases rolled again, out of sync, then from the tree-lean, then nowhere in particular. Our own sentences tossed back at us like pebbles. The locker's whistle had learned a new trick. We didn't debate it, we fled. The minivan climbed onto the parkway, and the forest fell away into a ribbon of asphalt and sky. The echoes dropped off like we'd driven out of a radio's range. No one spoke. We sat with the engine's hum and our breathing. I stared at my reflection faintly ghosted in the passenger window. Wide eyes, damp hair, a smear of sunscreen, and tried to decide if I'd imagined everything. I am not someone who jumps at shadows. I work in logistics. I like rules. I had just broken one, been kindly corrected, and then what? Warned? Alara, I'm sure, went back to her rounds and logged advised group about camper-only facilities. Our drama was a footnote to her day. For us, it went bone deep. We stopped at an overlook because Hans needed both hands to be still. Twilight poured into the valleys. The mountains looked more like waves than land. "I don't understand," he said finally, voice small. It was as if the mountains were answering. "Not answering," Anya murmured. "Mimicking," I added, like being mocked by a good impressionist. No one laughed. I felt very European and very out of place, not because a rule had nudged us out of a shower, but because something older had noticed us breaking rhythm. We stayed on the right side of every sign after that. We kept to visitor centers and marked trails. And yet the oddness followed, quiet as breath. A mirror in a restroom fogged in an instant when I stepped toward it, then cleared when I stepped back. A metal grate in a picnic shelter made a soft fluted tone when the wind shifted, then fell silent when I held my breath, as if it were sinking with me. A family passing us on a path said, "It's beautiful," in a way that scratched at my ear. My words from earlier, same order, different mouth. We talked less about vistas and more about silences. We joked about it sometimes. Dark humor is a European vaccine, but the jokes never cured it. The group got gentler with one another, like we were walking through someone's house while they were sleeping. When we left the park, I felt that strange combination of relief and regret you get sneaking out of a party too early. Back home, friends wanted bear stories and black and white photos of mist. I told them about the views, of course. I didn't tell many people about the locker breathing or the borrowed voices. It sounds soft in the retelling, like nerves. But I know what I heard. I know the way the hair on my arms stood up before the first echo came. Brad and I left the city with coffee breath and stupid grins. The Jeep pointed at Mount Hood's clean white triangle. The highway unspooled, and so did the static in my head. We talked about small things, his new wrench set, my boss's habit of circling back, and big things we kept putting off, like where we'd live if rent spiked again. The mountain waited, patient and obvious, a postcard you could drive into. We found a turnout off a rutted forest road, where the pines stood tall and tight, wind hissing through the needles like radio static. Shoulder season meant fewer cars, fewer voices. The campsite felt mostly untouched. A black ring of old fire, a flat patch of duff, a sky wide enough to drown in. We unloaded like we knew the choreography, tent, pads, sleeping bags, the battered cooler with the missing hinge. I kicked off my boots and peeled my socks, letting my toes steam in the cold air. Brad whistled low. 10 out of 10, he said, about the sight or the view or the way I'd wriggled out of my leggings and into cutoffs behind an unconvincing privacy tree. Dinner was chorizo and peppers in a tiny pan, hot and greasy, eaten with our fingers because we forgot forks. I drank a can of beer too fast and another too slow, heat building in my cheeks. We talked about last summer's coast trip, about the time I misread a tide chart, and we ran like idiots up the sand. He looked softer here, shoulders down, hands not full of his phone. When the fire burned to orange bones, we crawled into the tent. We made out lazy and half-laughing, hands under flannel and over warm skin. It wasn't cinematic. My knee popped and his zipper caught my hair, but it felt easy, honest. The night outside clicked and breathed. I locked the Jeep, tossed the keys in the ignition the way we always did on trips, so we wouldn't misplace them, and forgot about everything except his chest under my palm and the smell of smoke in my hair. We fell asleep to the forest's low murmur. Something woke me before dawn, not a sound so much as the lack of one. The hush had weight, it pressed across the nylon. My heart was loud in my throat. Brad breathed slow, hot on my shoulder. I slid my arm out from under him and unzipped the tent an inch. Then, too, the teeth loud to my ears. The sky was a thin bruise, the trees black cutouts. The Jeep sat where we'd left it, a dark animal. I stared until the shape sharpened and felt it rather than saw it. The driver's door not flush, a small, wrong line of shadow. I waited for the usual trill of a night bird, the scrabble of something small in the duff. Nothing. I could hear my pulse and distantly the snowmelt creak. A prickle ran across my scalp. I told myself I was being dramatic. I closed the zipper, slid down into the bag, and waited for sleep that didn't come. When dawn finally cracked the sky, I got up stiff and thirsty. The Jeep's door was, in fact, unlatched. I opened it, and the cold felt personal. The keys weren't where I'd left them. Not on the seat, not hanging from the ignition. Panic flared bright. Then I saw them, placed neatly on the ground by the front passenger tire, the metal catching the pale light. As if someone set them there with 2 careful fingers. Our gear was fine. Stove, bags, GPS untouched. Back at the tent, I saw a crisp mud print at Brad's zipper line. The tread sharp and wrong, a wet kiss on the nylon. My mouth went dry. I looked around at the forest as if the trees would shrug and say, "Yeah, he came through around 4." Inside the Jeep, the wrongness multiplied. The driver's seat had been ratcheted forward 2 clicks. I knew because my knees bumped the wheel when I slid in. The rearview mirror pointed higher than it should, my own face chopped at the eyes, and dusted across the dash and the seat, so fine you had to tilt your head to catch it, was a veil of yellow pollen. The windows had been sealed all night. The car had been locked. Yet here it was, a soft, sandy fingerprint of the place inside. Brad finally unzipped out of the bag, hair smashed on one side, lines on his cheek from the pad. He stretched, scratched, stepped into the light in his boxers and socks, and smiled. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I told him everything. Keys by the tire, door ajar, the 2 clicks, the mirror, the pollen, the mud print on his side of the tent. He rubbed the print with his thumb like he could smudge it back into doubt. "I probably did that," he said. "Got up to pee. I don't remember." He said it like a joke and not like a lie. "What about the seat?" I asked. He shrugged. "You drove last." I didn't. He shrugged again, the kind that closes a door. When I wouldn't let it go, he offered me a dream. "Okay," he said, softening. "I had this weird dream. Somebody was outside the tent. Tall. Not right. It left a mark on the rain fly, like a little scuff, right here." He touched the exact place on the fly I'd already noticed, a faint, fresh scrape I hadn't told him about, because I was still deciding whether I'd imagined it. Cold bloomed in my belly. Dreams don't match real scuffs to the inch. "Brad." I heard the tremor in my voice. "Tell me what happened." He watched the trees over my shoulder, jaw tight. The easy version of him slid away. "I know more than I'm saying," he said finally, low and flat. "And for both our sakes, we don't talk about last night again." That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. He picked up the keys, brushed imaginary dirt from them, and set them on the hood like punctuation. "We pack, we go, we don't tell anyone. Not rangers, not friends. No posts. We're done here." "Who was it?" He shook his head once. "Drop it." We packed in silence, the cheerful clack of carabiners and stuffed sacks replaced by the ugly music of avoidance. I kept seeing the keys by the tire, the tidy malice of it. I kept seeing pollen like a sprinkle of sugar across the dash, the seat not where we'd left it, the mark on the fly that matched his dream. I kept seeing the print at his zipper. I kept trying not to see his face when he told me to shut up. We left the fire ring cold and neat, as if that made us good. The Jeep felt smaller on the way out, air stale with our unasked questions. Brad drove with both hands at 10 and 2, eyes fixed ahead. His profile had become a mask I couldn't read. I watched the trees slide by and thought about how quiet it had been. The kind of quiet that means something is listening. Miles later he turned on the radio, and then off again. I picked at a hangnail until it bled. We didn't touch. The mountain receded in the rear view, white and harmless as a sticker. I used to measure my life in tidy quarters and color-coded cells. Chicago looked best from a spreadsheet. Columns for mortgage, tuition, bonuses. Rows for the birthdays I missed because some quarterly close was hemorrhaging. My marriage wasn't a war so much as a quiet ceasefire. We spoke logistics more than love. The annual Appalachian hike was Sarah's idea of repair, fresh air as therapy. I treated it like a deliverable: pack, drive, trail, smile for photos with the kids, drive back. That year, though, something in me snapped like a cheap tent pole. While they followed the white blazes, I stepped off. Not to die, to breathe. To stop being a walking expense report. The Smokies swallowed me fast. The canopy made noon feel like late evening, cicadas buzzing like static over an old call. My shirt glued itself to my back, my underarms stung with salt. I reeked. I pissed behind a laurel thicket and laughed, a little feral, at how good it felt to be inconvenient and alone. The compass in my pocket was my fig leaf of responsibility. I checked it often enough to pretend I wasn't lost. By hour 3 the needle started spinning like a drunk. The sun kept ducking behind cloud and leaf. I cursed, loud, ugly, and kept walking because going back is a city habit, and out here pride looks a lot like hunger. That's when I saw the first chalk arrow on a slick of stone. A clean line and point, wet white against the gray. I assumed some trail angel had left breadcrumbs. Then I saw another arrow 100 paces later pointing the opposite direction, and a third on a tulip poplar that sent me downhill. It felt like being given instructions by a committee. The terrain pinched into a slot, a crease in the earth, narrow and cool, ferny breath rising from it. At the end, a seam in the rock with darkness stitched beyond it, and on the stone beside it the fattest, neatest arrow yet. I stood there, sore and pissed off and curious. The hole smelled like damp pennies and mushrooms. I ducked in. The sound changed first. Forest chatter died. I heard my own breath, a dull thud somewhere deeper, and, this part embarrassed me later, the faint giggle of kids. My headlamp ate a tunnel's worth of black and fed me touches of phosphorescent smear on the walls, slick and beautiful. My boots slipped, my palms picked up grit. I muttered shit and shook it off. The chalk arrows kept appearing at intervals, bright teeth in the dark, and I followed because I had already decided I was done following the life I knew. So why not follow this? The tunnel let go just when I decided I'd made a hell of a mistake. I stumbled into a cavern big enough to stage a secret. The ceiling disappeared into shadow. The walls pulsed green-blue where fungi clung, and lanterns, actual glass lanterns, hung from iron hooks, warm as kitchen windows at night. People moved there. Not tourists. Not spelunkers. Barefoot kids with wide, careful eyes chased each other, clicking car key fobs that blinked red in the dim like tiny pulse monitors. A dog watched me from a ledge, head tilted, as calm and appraising as a lone officer. No one shrieked. No one brandished a weapon. A man with a beard the color of ash, and a face gone soft in the kind way raised one open hand. "You're far from your numbers," he said, and I almost laughed because I hadn't yet told him I was an accountant. He called himself Elder Silas. The dog hopped down and nosed my knuckles like it had been trying to find me all along. They took me in like weather, acknowledged, accommodated. I drank tin cup water that tasted like stone and leaf. I ate stew that was humble and perfect and burned my tongue. I took off my city shirt, rank, damp, embarrassing, and pulled on a rough cotton top someone handed me. It smelled like clean dirt. No names above ground. The children sang before slurping, and the phrase nudged my spine. I asked what it meant. "We keep what we keep," Silas said. "The rest we lay down." They called the place the Hearthstone Enclave. Not a cult, no chanting, no leader on a throne. Just work. Gardens under glow. Clay pots curing by warmth and time. Arrows chalked on stone where passages forked. Dogs that disappeared and reappeared by some sense humans had sold for convenience. At first the kids with the flashing fobs creeped me out. It felt like playing with keys to a car you'd wrecked. Then it landed. They were practicing letting go, their little thumbs pressing that red blink the way I used to press send. Days blurred. My body learned cave time, tasks and meals, and the long soft stretch of quiet that wasn't loneliness. I slept like someone had turned down the universe. In the dark my mind unscrolled lists I hadn't known I carried, deadlines, arguments, the weightless way I said we're fine when nothing was. I woke up with grit in my beard and a clean ache in my shoulders, and I preferred it to any shower-scented Monday I'd ever had. When Silas finally asked, he didn't dress it up. We were sitting on a ledge, legs dangling, the cavern breathing around us. "You can walk out," he said. "We'll give you a dog and chalk. You will grieve this place. Or you can stay. If you stay, the surface dies inside you. They'll mourn a body the mountain never gives back. Both choices are honest." He looked at me the way a spreadsheet looks when you've entered the last formula and the truth pops. I pictured Sarah, her hands around a mug, her mouth tugging left when she worried. I pictured my son's soccer cleats by the door, my daughter's glitter trail everywhere. I pictured the office, its glass, its hum, its minor tyrannies. It broke me in a new way that didn't feel like failure. The dog rested its chin on my knee. I cried. I swore. I picked the thing that made no sense and all the sense. I can't go back and be who I was, I said. I don't know how. Silas nodded like I'd solved for X. There were no oaths. I didn't burn my wallet. I tucked the few above-ground artifacts into a crate with other tucked-away lives. My name thinned. People called me what they needed in the moment. Brother, hand, you. I learned the chalk language and how to tell the cave's moods by the taste of the air. The children pressed red buttons and laughed and grew bored and then grew up. I taught them math with pebbles. I told stories that ended at the horizon. I stopped composing emails in my head. Time became a thicker thing. Silas died as gently as a lantern guttering, and what he'd carried distributed itself through us. I found myself repeating his phrases in my own rasp. The dog still knew before we did. Sometimes I dreamed my family's search parties, fluorescent vests moving like fireflies. The grief arrived less like a storm than a tide. I let it wet my ankles and fall back. I am not immoral. I'm a man who stepped off the trail and kept stepping. In Chicago, they would have called me a loss. Down here I am a citizen, a quiet one, an unseen one. I don't count quarters anymore. I count harvests and repairs and the thud of my heart in a place that doesn't need my LinkedIn or my nice shoes. When I close my eyes, I can still see a red blink in the dark, a tiny, stubborn signal from a life I carried like a pager. It still flashes sometimes. I let it. Then I pocket it, pat the dog's head, and follow the chalk home.